Transformations, Women, Gender, and Psychology, 3rd edition by Mary Crawford. Chapter 14, Making a Difference Toward a Better Future for Women. Throughout history, women have struggled to have their voices heard and their contributions to society accepted. For over 150 years, the women's movement has provided a powerful force for change. The first wave of feminist activists included the suffragists who achieved the vote for women in the early 1900s. The second wave, whose activism began in the 1960s, worked on issues such as reproductive rights, workplace equality, sexism in the media, non-sexist child raising, the integration of women into science and politics, and an end to violence against women. Today, third-wave feminists continue the tradition, working on some of the same inequities that second-wave feminism tackled and adding new ones. The continued objectification of women, reproductive rights in high-tech era, global trafficking in girls and women, LGBTQ rights, and many more. Contemporary feminism. Feminists are a diverse group on dimensions such as nationality, ethnicity, social class, and religion. This diversity is a strength because it encourages people to work for social change in many areas and to use a variety of strategies. Throughout this book, we have seen that the problems faced by working-class women are quite different from those faced by professional women. Older women experience different forms of sexism than younger women. Women who mother run into a different kind of stereotyping and inequalities than those who do not. Anyone whose sexual orientation is different from the heterosexual norm may encounter prejudice and discrimination on that basis. People whose bodies are marked by differences are claiming the right to their own dimensions of diversity. As shown by activism for the rights of intersex and transgender people, women of color have taken their rightful place in feminist leadership and activism, and women from around the globe speak to their own society's issues. The Nigerian-born writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, recipients of a MacArthur Genius Grant, authored a TED Talk, "We Should All Be Feminists," that has been viewed more than 3.2 million times and sampled by Beyoncé. Respect the differences is a cornerstone of feminist philosophy and activism. Feminists have also shared other values and goals. At the most basic level, a feminist is one who believes in the worth and value of women. As a 1970s bumper sticker proclaimed, feminism is a radical notion that women are people. Moreover, feminists recognize that social change is necessary and that no one can create social justice by herself. They believe that people should work together to change society so that women can lead more secure, satisfying, and fulfilling lives. This belief is in collective action or group solidarity towards social change, differentialities feminism from just individual women achieving success. Increasingly, feminism is a global social movement. International conferences like the landmark Beijing Conference of '95 and Beijing Plus 15 and 2010 Forum, who brought women together to learn from each other about the particular forms that patriarchy takes in each society and to share effective strategies for change. And international activism is growing based on the recognition that the unfulfilled promise of human rights for women is one of the biggest issues of the 21st century. Imagery and attitudes. Like other progressive movements for social justice, feminism has met with resistance from those who benefit from inequality. Each time that feminist perspectives have gained power, there has been a backlash. Attempts to put women and particularly feminists back in their place. The backlash has taken different forms at different times in history, but some characteristic patterns emerge repeatedly. One form of backlash is to label feminists and their ideas as crazy. As noted in Chapter 13, women until recently risked being labeled mad if they wanted to think or act independently. Today, the label is more likely to be lesbian or man-hater. Let's look more closely at resistance to feminism. Images and stereotypes of feminists. When first-wave feminists began organizing to win the right to vote, political cartoonists depicted them in ways that seem very familiar today. Figure 14.2 shows suffragists as ugly, cigar-smoking, angry women who foist their babies off on men. Their exposed legs represent their dangerous, out-of-control sexuality. They are labeled as brassy, sharp-tongued man-tamers. In the 1970s, these images and stereotypes resurfaced. The media image of second-wave feminists was negative. News reports and opinion columnists created a new stereotype of fanatics, braless bubbleheads, Amazons, the angries, and a band of wild lesbians. The result is that we all know what feminists are. They are shrill, overly aggressive, man-hating, ball-busting, selfish, hairy extremists, deliberately unattractive women with absolutely no sense of humor who see sexism at every turn. They make men's testicles shrivel up to the size of peas. They detest the family and think all children should be deported or drowned. Feminists are relentless, unforgiving, and unwilling to bend or compromise. They are single-handedly responsible for the high divorce rates, the shortage of decent men, and the unfortunate proliferation of Birkenstocks in America. In the 1980s, the media began to declare feminism outdated, claiming that equal rights had been fully achieved. Society was now in a post-feminist era, and women were abandoning feminism because it had terrible costs. In the 80s, version of backlash, everything from infertility to the breakdown of society was blamed on feminism, and its time was declared long past. Today, the public image of feminist has both positive and negative aspects. Feminists are viewed positively as women working together to achieve goals, and negatively as man-hating extremists. Even when people do not hold negative beliefs themselves, they think that others do. In one study, 171 women completed measures of attitudes towards feminism for themselves, and also were asked to complete the measures as they thought other people would. Both feminists and non-feminists believe that others have negative views of feminists and consider them more likely to be lesbians than straights. Men's attitudes are mixed too. Interviews with British male high school students and adult men reveal that they had Jekyll and Hyde views. Feminists are reasonable women who just want equality, and ugly man-hating lesbians who go around banging and shooting and just want men to jump in the river. Surprisingly, many men held both of these contradictory views. A recurring theme in these stereotypes is that feminists are man-haters. Psychologist Kristen Anderson and her colleagues decided to get some empirical evidence on this claim. In an ethically diverse sample of nearly 500 college students, they found that feminists had significantly less hostility towards men than non-feminists. In a review of the most recent research, Anderson still found no empirical evidence whatsoever to support the notion that feminist attitudes towards men are more negative than non-feminists. Conservatives with influence in the media play all the negative stereotypes. 2 days after the 9/11 tragedy, televangelist Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson famously concurred that pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians had contributed to the attacks by undermining moral standards and causing God to stop protecting America. In the news media, conservative commentaries try to scare men and turn women away from working together for equality by referring to feminazis and characterizing any critics of the status quo as male bashing. A favorite right-wing term is militant feminist, though what it means is unclear. Personally, I have never met a feminist with an assault weapon or heard of any feminist armies about to march on Congress or the guys' locker room. Feminism, of course, is not about bashing or making war on men. It is about working to change the social structure, interactional and individual levels of the gender system that disadvantage girls and women. Attitudes towards feminism. The societal image of feminism and feminists clearly influence individual attitudes. On the one hand, studies during the 80s and 90s showed that college women described feminists as strong, caring, capable, open-minded, knowledgeable, and intelligent. On the other hand, being labeled a feminist brings a certain stigma. When college women were asked to report their own beliefs and those of a typical feminist, even those who identified themselves as feminists felt that the typical feminist was more extreme in beliefs than they themselves were. Many women are reluctant to label themselves as feminists. In one survey, 78% of college women said they were not feminist, although the majority agreed with some or most of the goals of the women's movement. And even the feminists reported that they didn't always admit to being feminist in public. Despite the negative stereotypes, some women do identify themselves as feminists and support collective action for social change on behalf of women. Psychologist Miriam Liss and Mindy Urkel and their colleagues have explored feminist identity and its correlates. For example, they conducted several studies of the factors that predicted whether a woman will choose to identify as a feminist: exposure to feminist ideas, having a generally positive view of feminists, and recognizing the very important existence and recognizing that discrimination exists are important. In a study of 282 women college students, they found that life experiences such as having a feminist mother, taking a women's study course, and having personal experience with sexism predicted liberal beliefs. In turn, these beliefs led to identifying oneself as a feminist and believing in collective action. When a woman says of herself, "I am a feminist," she is more likely to engage in activism on behalf of women than are other women who have similar beliefs about gender and equality, but who do not label themselves as feminist. In other words, feminist identity is linked to feminist activism. There have been very little systematic research on attitudes towards feminism among women of diverse ethnic groups and almost none on men's attitudes. Are African American, Asian American, and Latin American likely to identify as feminist? What about men from these groups? One study approached these questions by surveying 1,140 students at an urban university. Students were asked for their definitions of feminism and their reason for identifying or not as feminist. Overall, 4 out of 5 participants defined feminism in terms of gender equality. For example, a Latino man said that feminism is a movement that demands equality in women's rights. However, some students in all groups endorse stereotypes. One European American woman said that feminists are radical women who believe men are inferior to them and that women should rule the world. European American women were most likely to identify as feminists, followed by Latinas, African American women, and finally Asian American women. The finding that African and Asian women were much less likely to identify as feminists suggests that the feminist movement needs to do more work on goals relevant to these groups. As for the men, only a small minority in any of the ethnic groups identified as feminists. Moreover, 24% of the men who did not identify as feminists said it was because they were men. This result is disheartening because saying that a man cannot be a feminist is like saying that a white person cannot participate in the civil rights movement. Egalitarian men are important and valued allies for women and have been since the birth of feminism. I invite you to think critically about the ways that feminists and feminism are portrayed in our society. Contrary to stereotype, feminists are not monsters. In a study of over 650 women who filed in an online questionnaire about their feminist beliefs and identity, those who called themselves feminists acknowledged the existence of sexism, perceive the current gender system as unjust, and believe that women should work together to change it. In addition, those who call themselves feminists support the goals of the women's movement and tend not to hold conservative beliefs. They neither hate men nor idolize them. Feminists are more likely than non-feminists to see through the reject unrealistic ideals for women, such as the overemphasis on extreme thinness, appearance, and romantic relationships. In a review of research on the relationships between feminist attitudes and psychological well-being, Anderson found that in virtually all that the areas that have been measured, feminist attitudes and feminist identities are linked with positive effects on women, including more satisfying heterosexual relationships, healthier sexual attitudes, greater self-efficiency, feeling of empowerment, and more positive body image. It is important to remember, however, that research on attitude and well-being is correlational. We cannot know whether feminism caused positive changes in psychological well-being, whether women with this characteristic are more likely to become feminist, or whether other factors are responsible. We just know that feminists on average have better psychological well-being than non-feminists. Personally, I am proud to call myself a feminist, and I find distorted media portrayals of feminists and feminism disturbing. Consider this question: whose interest does it serve if a movement to end sexism and the oppression of women is portrayed as crazy, misguided, and totally unnecessary? Yet the women's movement is unstoppable. On January 21st, 2017, more than 2.5 million people in cities and towns around the world participated in women's rights marches to protest the inauguration of President Donald Trump. In Washington, D.C., the pink pussycat hat became a new symbol of women's resistance to patriarchal control. Women's rights are human rights. They are so important that, far from holding to an inflexible party line, feminists have always encouraged debate and a plurality of viewpoints. In writing this book, I have tried to present a variety of feminist perspectives with the goal of encouraging you to think critically about them. Feminist psychology and social change. The second wave of the women's movement had important effects on psychology. One of the most basic changes was the number of women in psychology and their status within the field. Even more important than the number is the influence of feminist theory and research. The changing face of psychology. Only a few short years ago, psychologists who happened to be women could not get hired by high-status universities and were rarely taken seriously as scientists. Ethnic minority psychologists, too, were marginalized. Today, women earn the majority of higher degrees in psychology. Psychologists who are women and ethnic minorities lead well-established professional organizations, produce many books and journals, and participate in every aspect of psychological research, education, and practice. I saw a small example of the changing gender norms within psychology recently. At my university, there are regular lunchtime research talks for faculty and graduate students. At one, the speakers were a married couple with different last names who do their research jointly. With them were their 2 children, a 4-year-old son and a 1-month-old infant. The man started their research presentation while mom took the children to play outside. Sexist? Not exactly. Halfway through the talk, she returned. Dad took the kids outside, and she concluded the presentation and discussion of their research. A lunchtime psychology program became an example of collaborative research, shared parenting, and the balancing act of multiple roles for both women and men. Progress is uneven, however. It will probably be a while before such a scene occurs regularly enough that it is taken for granted. Women in psychology still have trouble making it into the top ranks. On average, they publish less, and their work is cited less than the work of their male peers. It is difficult to determine how much this is due to overt discrimination and how much to the broader socio-cultural factors discussed throughout this book, such as stereotype threat, backlash against genetic women, the unequal division of labor at home, and the lack of governmental policies to support work families in the U.S., such as paid parental leave and government-supported childcare.